In part one of this program on Herod's temple, we saw that the temple looked something like this, consisting of the temple proper in the middle there and the enclosure walls and buildings around the outside of it. The first program was spent on the western side, known as the Western Wall, which looks like this today along here. It's a Wailing Wall there. The exposed part, of course, is often referred to as the Wailing Wall. For centuries, Jews have gathered there to mourn the loss of their temple and to pray. You can see a lot of them down there when this picture was taken doing that. At the northern end of the Wailing Wall, we saw an arch named Wilson's Arch, pointed there by the red arrow. Archaeologists have revealed that it originally looked like this, across here. It was a bridge or a viaduct, and it spanned the Tyropoeon Valley, connecting the Temple Mount with the upper city on the west. We saw inside Wilson's Arch some cavernous halls, such as you see here, which were originally under the viaduct. From these cavernous halls, the Jews have dug a tunnel alongside the western wall right up to the northern end. Originally, there was a pavement up the full length of the western wall, but today it's congested with Arab houses. That's the western wall up there, and of course you see all the houses over there. So a tunnel had to be dug under the houses and strongly reinforced. The temple wall is seen here on the right of that picture. The excavators came across this ancient gateway, which has been sealed since medieval times because Charles Warren discovered it. It was named after him, Warren's Gate. The gate originally led directly into the Temple Mount. It was the most important of all because it was nearest to the Holy of Holies. It's gate number 23 there. We then came back to the southern end of the Wailing Wall to Barclay's Gate, number 4 here. All that can be seen of the gate today is half of the lintel outlined in black around there, and a section of the doorway now filled in with these small stones down around here. A later construction projecting from the wall actually obstructs the entrance. The original gate would have looked something like this here on the model. And we saw it had an internal stairway like this leading up onto the Temple Mount. We finally moved down to the southern end of the western wall, seen here, to what is now known as Robinson's Arch, the remains of which can be seen on the wall up there. Excavation has revealed it originally looked something like this. It was a projecting walkway up into the southern end of the Temple Mount. So then, there were a total of 4 entrances to the Temple Mount on the western side, known today as Warren's Gate, Wilson's Arch, Barclay's Gate, and Robinson's Arch. They are all named after past explorers and excavators, all clearly seen in that picture there. All right, so much for the Western Wall. Let's now move around to the southern wall, this wall along here. This, of course, is an artist's impression of the original wall based on research. The main features are the double and triple gates and the monumental stairway. There's the double gateway there, the triple gate there, and there's the monumental stairway there. Take a good look at this picture and compare it with the next one. This one was taken of the Temple Mount some decades ago before excavation had taken place. The monumental steps leading up to where the double gateway was were completely buried. Nobody even knew where they were. This picture was taken after the area all along the outside of the southern wall had been excavated. The Mosque of Omar, that's the one with the gold dome there, now stands where the Jewish sanctuary used to be. The other mosque, this one here, stands where Herod's double gateway went through the wall, as we saw double gateway there. A Crusader tower and Turkish wall now intersect the wall where the gates were, this area here. Excavation has uncovered some of the monumental stairway going up to the gates, as you can see down here. The triple gateway further along the wall to the east has long since been filled in. This aerial picture taken from the east gives a better view of the intersecting Crusader tower and the Turkish wall. There's the Turkish tower there, and the steps up there. For 10 years, from 1968 to 1977, intensive excavation took place outside the southern wall, the effect of which is seen here, and many discoveries were made relating to the original Herod's temple. In this picture we've moved in closer, and you can see a group of people in the shade on the section of the monumental stairway that has been uncovered. You see people up there. They're probably tourists being shown the remnants of Herod's temple. And here we are, closer again to the stairway. There were 30 steps altogether, providing entrances to and exits from the Temple Mount on the south side. The position of the double gateway cannot be seen in this picture, but the other three sealed gateways further east along the wall can be seen, and we'll have a closer look at them shortly. Only half an arch marks the position of the sealed double gateway today, as is indicated here. The arch was added to the gateways during the Byzantine period, over 600 years after Herod built them, to make them more ornamental. Then, around the 12th century AD, the Crusaders sealed the 6-metre, 20-foot high gateway for defence purposes and built a tower in front of it. Once again, in this picture, you can see the remains of the tower jutting out from the wall where the gateway used to be. This picture, taken from the model showing the double gateway and stairway, gives a good idea of their original appearance. The width of the stairway was 64 metres, about 210 feet. As you can see, the gates were originally plain on the outside, having no decoration or ornamentation, but each one had a massive lintel and relieving arch above it. As I said before, an ornamental arch was added to the gateway during the Byzantine period to take away the plainness, to make it more decorative. This drawing here indicates what it looked like before the Crusader tower blocked it. The tower wall is indicated by the grey area, and the portion on the far right, of course, is all that can be seen of the gateway today, this area here. Here's a closer view of it, in which the architectural features can be seen better. Above the arch is the section of the lintel here, and above that is the relieving arch. You can just sort of see the slight curve there where the arch was. And above that is the fragment of another smaller Byzantine decoration. These features are depicted in this diagram. I wonder how many visitors to Jerusalem have noticed the half arch and not understood or appreciate its original significance. Unless you're told, you wouldn't know that it was part of a 2,000-year-old gateway dating back to Herod's temple, which our Lord Jesus visited. This is one of the advantages of the work and the research of the archaeologists. Although the double gateway is sealed and concealed on the outside, the gates and a large part of the passageway inside are still amazingly intact and can be entered from inside the Temple Mount, as was the case when this picture was taken. We're looking south inside the passageway towards the outside wall and sealed gateways. Sunlight can be seen coming through a window in the wall of the Crusader Tower. The passageway we're looking down is the one that comes from the gate on the west side of the wall, and in the area on our left is the passageway that comes from the other gate. The lit area on the left is a doorway that leads into side chambers. Notice also the two domes in the ceiling. There are two in the other passageway as well. This one's clearly seen, other one in there, of course. Here's a plan of the double gate interior. The red dot represents the position from which the last picture was taken. The two coloured domes are the ones we saw in the previous picture, and the other two on the opposite side of them. The window through which sunlight came is at the bottom. It is in the entrance to the Crusader Tower. On the basis of existing structural and architectural evidence, this drawing was produced, in which we're standing at the outside entrance to the double gateway in the southern wall, looking into one of the passageways which leads up into the outer court of the Temple Mount. Plain though these gates were on the exterior, on the inside, their passageways were showcases of the art of Herodian masonry and stone carving. The domes are quite unique. In the northwestern dome, a border of acanthus leaves frames a scallop design. In the southwestern design, as depicted in this drawing, a grapevine twines among 8 decorated squares, only 5 of which are shown on the drawing. The unique decorations of floral and geometric motifs is a fine example of how Herod's craftsmen adapted Roman decorative styles while still conforming to Jewish law, which forbade the representation of human or animal figures. What you're looking at here is a rock-cut passageway that's entered by stairs leading down under the double gate. The Temple Mount is actually a maze of tunnels and corridors. This here is a general view of the southern wall from the southwest of the model, giving a good idea of the appearance of the gates and steps. Notice that narrow step streets also ran along the southern wall as they did the western wall. Beneath these streets were shops which sold goods and produce, talking about these along here. This is a closer view of the shops or markets where cloth, wool, shoes, dates and other foodstuffs were offered for sale. Josephus refers to them when he describes the battle scenes that took place there in AD 70 when the Romans besieged. Various artists have also made their contributions, trying to recreate the scene 2,000 years ago when throngs of worshippers were coming and going, entering into and departing from the gates in the southern enclosure wall of the temple. The population of the southern section of the city, that is the older part of the city on the ridge, would have come up this way to enter the Temple Mount. In the background of this picture, part of the western suburb of the city and city wall can be seen. Those living here would have used the gates on the western wall. Jesus and his apostles would have walked in all of these areas. Let's now move along the wall to the triple gate depicted here on the model. As you can see, it's also sealed. In spite of there being 3 gates here, compared to only 2 at the double gateway, the stairway was much narrower. It measures only 15 metres, about 50 feet, whereas the stairway going up to the double gate, as I mentioned, was about 64 metres wide, about 210 feet. You can see how wide the steps are by comparison with those that go up to the double gate. There they both are there, having been unearthed by the archaeologists. And these here are the steps leading up to the triple gate, having been repaired. And so have also the steps up to the double gate been repaired. Passageways also led off from the triple gate up into the outer court of the Temple Mount, and geometric and flower designs covered the ceilings of these passageways and represented specific local species. One of the geometric designs is actually on the screen now. Some 300 fragments were found, and they were no doubt originally painted in vivid, realistic colours. This is one of the flower designs. Josephus exclaims that, quote, "The temple was the most wonderful edifice ever seen or heard of, both for its size of construction and for the lavish perfection of detail and the glory of its holy places." End of quote. The flower design seems to have been a popular form of decoration during that period of history, as can be seen on these limestone ossuaries found in tombs in Jerusalem dating back to New Testament times. I'll say more about these later. Here's a diagram showing where the passageways from the double and triple gateways came out on the Temple Mount. They opened out almost on the southern line of Solomon's original square mount. Here you see the double gate leading up here into the Temple Mount, and the triple gate here leading up into the there. And this represents the boundary of Solomon's area where his temple was. You'll notice they're referred to as tunnels, and so they were, for the gateways were well below the surface of the mount. They were really like subways. This picture of the model shows the exits of the passageways coming up onto the mount. The exit from the triple gate is in the foreground and here, and that from the double gate is here. We're looking from south to north, and the actual external gateways were over here, and they came in underground and up through here, or up through there. Further across to the other, that is the western side, is the exit from the L-shaped passageway which led up from Barclay's Gate on the western side. There it is there, where they came up. Entrance to the temple up the steps on the southern side would have been easier for those bringing sacrificial animals than up the steeper steps on the western side. Once again, this picture shows you the staircase leading up to the triple gateway, and although there was a passageway leading up to the Temple Mount, this gateway seems to have been more directly connected with the vaulted storerooms that lay underground beneath the southeast part of the temple platform, which we will see shortly. Materials for the temple service were stored there, so it is thought that the narrower staircase to the triple gateway may have been used by the priests, and the wider staircase to the double gateway was used by the pilgrims. In this picture on the screen, you again see the sealed triple gateway in contrast to what it was. In the foreground are the excavated ruins of a two-chambered vault which supported the stairway. Two of the three entrances can be seen here. Oops, didn't want that one to go. Up here, there's two of them you can see there. And more excavated ruins from the Roman period are in front, including a rounded archway of dressed stones set in concrete mortar alongside a straightly aligned street. Here's an interesting picture. It's the imprint of an arch burnt into the southern wall. You see it there? This small arch shell is the first one east of the Triple Gate and was probably a shop. Imprints of others were also made. It's a ghostly reminder of that 8th day of September AD 70 when the Roman soldiers overran the temple and its precincts, putting everything to the torch. You'll have noticed two buildings between the stairway of the double and triple gate. These buildings here. Based on a passage in the Mishnah, the building to the right has been identified as a council house, one of three where the Jewish court sat in Jerusalem. The building on the left was a bathhouse, a mikveh, where pilgrims ritually purified themselves before entering the Temple Mount. The pools had to be deep enough to allow total immersion and ideally contained 270 litres, that's about 60 gallons of water. Sometimes, as you'll see in the next picture, the steps leading down to the bath were divided by a railing. It's thought the petition prevented the purified bather who was leaving the bath from treading on steps that had been trodden on by those who descended in an impure state. Along the southern part of the Temple Mount, between the double and triple gates, archaeologists have discovered ritual immersion baths like this one cut into the bedrock. At the very top of this picture can be seen the end edges of the steps that led up to the double gateway up here, the steps up here. These ritual immersion baths must have served thousands of pilgrims who came up to the temple from all over Israel, in fact from all over the world. None would walk up the steps into the Temple Mount without firstly going down into the water. The Jews were obviously quite familiar with the principle of purification by immersion in water. It was really a baptism, which simply means to immerse in water. John the Baptist's practice, therefore, of baptizing would not have been new or strange to the Jews. The main difference was that he performed it in rivers instead of mikvahs, and he did it to prepare people to step into Christ, not step into Herod's temple. As you can see here and in previous pictures, major excavations have taken place along and around the southern wall of the temple, digging down to considerable depth to the original foundations of the complex. Here we see what they called a bucket brigade at work. The excavators put all the dirt and rubble into buckets, which are then passed up from one man to another, perched precariously on a ladder. At the top, it's all carefully sieved, looking for the tiniest evidence of ancient objects. As we saw around Robinson's Arch, which is just around this area here, the depth to which excavators have to dig down the enclosure wall just to reach the original street level of Herod's time is quite considerable. In some parts of the temple enclosure wall, there are up to 19 courses of stone, that is, beneath the present ground level, making bedrock 21 metres below, about 70 feet below. Here's one piece of rubble the excavators couldn't put into a bucket and pass up the ladder. It's a large fragment of Herod's masonry lying on what used to be the paved street around the southern wall of the Temple Mount. It was, of course, just one of many pieces of masonry toppled by the Romans in AD 70 when they knocked the top off. These four men were photographed doing some digging and sieving on the surface of the ground around the base of the temple enclosure wall. During excavation near the southern wall, a fragment of a stone vessel was found in the fill, bearing the inscribed letters KRBN, which means Corban, and signifies a sacrificial gift dedicated under oath. Here it is. Mark 7 verse 11 refers to Jesus speaking about Corban and the misuse of it by religious leaders. Two crudely drawn pigeons or doves also appear upside down below the inscription. The vessel may have been used with a sacrifice to celebrate the birth of a child, since these birds were traditional offerings on such occasions. These bowls were found near the Temple Mount. Although locally made, they're like Nabatean pottery, being thin-walled and painted with flower motifs. Their composition and style are quite unique, and so far these fragile vessels have only been found in Jerusalem. The southern area of the Temple Mount is now an archaeological park through which visitors or tourists can walk. An old wall from the 7th century AD period acts as a walkway from which the ruins and excavations can be viewed. Ruins from succeeding periods can also be seen by those who walk through this area. Coming back to the model, we see here the full expanse of the southern wall from the southeast as it looked in New Testament times when Jesus and the apostles visited it. The shops from the Triple Gate down to the east were where the imprint of arches were found burnt into the wall. These ones along here. Compare these pictures with the next one taken from a similar position of the area today. Quite a contrast. You can see from this picture the gates were well below the surface of the mount, requiring tunnels or subways for the people to get up there. Okay, so much for the southern side. Let's now move to the eastern side, the beginning of which can be seen in this picture along here. Prior to 1967, a bulldozer exposed the lower section of the wall for about 40 metres, about 130 feet from the corner, and you can see where the bank has been cut away, this area here. You can see it clearer in the next picture, this area along. There's the ground level there, and there is cut down. Despite the fact that little scientific excavation has taken place on this side of the mount, many clues to its original appearance have been preserved in its jigsaw of stones. Here's a close-up of the southeast corner. It's quite a massive wall. This corner, towering about 37.8 metres, that's 124 feet, higher than the Jury Hill Tower, above bedrock, about 73 metres or 240 feet above the Kidron Valley, is regarded by tradition as the parapet from which Jesus was tempted to throw himself down as a test of divine protection. As you can see, the wall is a patchwork of stones. This is due to it being extended and rebuilt by the Jews and reconstructed by successive conquerors. The lower section of larger stones on the left belongs to Herod's extension. He's around here. The lower section to the far right belongs to the Hasmonean extension, along here. And the join, where these two walls meet, it's about 32 metres, 105 feet from the corner, is known as the straight join. Looking further north up the wall to the right, you can see a column protruding from it. See it up there? A bend is in the wall at this point. Solomon's wall starts here, which was damaged by the Babylonians but repaired by Nehemiah. All the smaller stones in the upper courses are the result of reconstruction work by various conquerors after the Romans. This drawing of the same section of the wall highlights the features from the different building periods. This is a close-up of the straight join, where Herod's masonry on the left meets with and extends from the Hasmonean. As you can see, each wall ends abruptly at the join. Herod's stones are smoothly dressed with regular narrow margins, as you see around here, whereas the older Hasmonean stones to the right of the join display high, rounded, rough centres like that, which are called bosses, and irregular shapes and margins, of course. The differences are quite distinctive. Various features have been preserved in Herod's section of the wall, and the diagram underneath draws attention to them. 3 windows, which you see here, and with a lintel still in place, above one of them there, and the double gateway shown here, and the spring of an arch set on impost blocks is shown here. This is a reconstruction of that section of the wall. Notice firstly how high up the ground level of the temple court is up here. The double gateway below the temple court gave access to storage vaults, and the arch spring supported a stairway that went down to the street level outside. This is the street level down here. All these features are portrayed on the model: the 3 windows, double gateways and stairway. Access to the storage vaults was not only gained through these gates, but also from the triple gates in the southern wall. On the model, here Jesus is depicted at the top of the corner tower being tempted. This cutaway plan of the Temple Mount shows the space, or the cavities, that Herod's extension created for the storage vaults. I'm referring to this area in here. This drawing of the southeast corner indicates how layers of vaults fill that space behind the wall, and the next picture was taken of the vaults themselves inside. They consist of both Herodian and Crusader masonry and are sometimes called Solomon's stables, but that is a misnomer. Solomon's platform didn't extend this far, and his masonry was completely different in shape and in size. The vaults were originally built to support the southern extension of the Temple Mount and were used as storage facilities for the temple. They were used as stables by the Crusaders and possibly others. and were capable of holding 2,000 or more horses. Unless you were told, you would not know that they were there today. The floor of the vault is 12 metres, about 40 feet below the level of the surface of the mount. The aisles open from south to north, and the sun can be seen streaming in from a window in the south wall. The steps come down from a passageway that leads off from the triple gate. The semicircular arches, about 3.5 metres, about 11.5 feet in span, and 4.8 metres, about 15 feet 9 high. Many Jews sought refuge in these subterranean vaults during the Roman siege in AD 70. The Temple Mount is really a labyrinth of tunnels, corridors, shafts, and cisterns dug out over many centuries by many different occupiers. At the moment, you're looking at an underground corridor which once led to the vaults. It's about 21 metres, 69 feet long, and about 1 metre or 3 feet wide. Before going along the eastern wall, this, on the basis of research, is what it looked like. In this aerial picture, we're looking at the eastern wall as it appears today, and of particular interest is the gate. As mentioned before, the eastern wall was the only one whose line was not changed. That is, not changed by Herod. The original eastern gate of Solomon's Temple Mount was at the same point in the wall as the present one, only lower down, as we saw in that program that I gave on Solomon's Temple. That is, it's underneath this existing one. The earliest masonry in the enclosure wall dating back to Solomon is in this area. The eastern gate is built into a turret that protrudes about 1.8 metres, about 6 feet from the wall, and the two arches have been bricked in and sealed long ago, probably for security reasons. It's called Golden Gate because the Greek word for beautiful became golden in the Latin Vulgate. Also, the rising early morning sun can give it a golden appearance. Some see a spiritual significance in the sealing of the eastern gate. The prophet Ezekiel saw the glory of God depart from the temple because of apostasy. It departed from the east and stood on the Mount of Olives. We read in Ezekiel 11, verse 23. Later, the prophet saw it returning from the east by way of the east gate, as John read to us this evening from Ezekiel chapter 43. This was prophetic of the coming of Messiah, who would come from the east in the glory of God. And so, Ezekiel 44, verse 1 to 3 goes on to say that the east gate would be shut because it was for the prince, that is, for the Messiah. Jesus, of course, is the Messiah, and he manifested the glory of God. His triumphal entry into Jerusalem prior to his crucifixion was through the eastern gate. And we read in Acts chapter 1 that he departed to heaven from the east, from the Mount of Olives. According to the angel's message in Acts chapter 1, Jesus will return in the same way as he departed, that is, physically and visibly, and to the same geographical location. And he'll certainly manifest the glory of God. Matthew 24 says he will come on the clouds of heaven with great power and great glory, As the lightning comes out of the east and shines as far as the west, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Zechariah 14 says, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem. There's going to be an earthquake that will split the mount in half and will heave up the original area of Jerusalem to a much greater height. The old walls of the Temple Mount will fall, along with the gates, opening up the way for the new Jerusalem, the city temple from which Jesus will reign. Because of the association of Messiah's coming with the Eastern Gate, many Jews, Christians and Muslims have been buried in the area of the gate over the centuries. The slopes on both sides of the Kidron Valley, in fact, are covered with graves. Because the Messiah returns via the Mount of Olives and the resurrection occurs at his coming, they wanted to be as close as possible to the area and the action. In this picture, graves can be seen by the hundreds, spread out on the other side of the Kidron Valley, which of course looks across to the Temple Mount. Here's a view of the Eastern Gate from inside the Temple Mount. The Mount of Olives can be seen in the background. The gate is really an elaborate structure that includes dome chambers that are entered by steps leading down from the Temple Mount. The massive side posts, one 3.65 metres or 12 feet high, the other 4.55 metres, about 15 feet, have been preserved inside the gate. As part of his rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem around 1540, Solomon built arches to buttress the walls of the eastern gate, which were leaning. So much then for the eastern wall. Finally, we direct attention to the northern side of Herod's temple enclosure wall, particularly the fortress on the northwest corner, which Herod named Antonia, up here. It was named after Mark Antony, the Roman ruler who had promoted him to power. In this picture, there it is up there. You can see it here on the scale model of Jerusalem in New Testament times, which is on display in the grounds of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. It was built upon a rock scarp which was high and precipitous, and Josephus says it was built to guard the temple. It had a tower at each corner, three of which were 23 metres, about 75 feet high, and the southeast one was about 105 feet high, commanding a view of the whole temple area. A Roman cohort was permanently stationed at the fortress, and at the Jewish festivals they took up positions in arms around the porticos to watch the people in case of any insurrection. Steps led down from the fortress to the porticos. Originally, the towers, fortress of Mia and Hananel, were on the site, mentioned in the book of Nehemiah and elsewhere. It's generally believed that the prison into which Herod cast Peter and other apostles was in this fortress. You remember how the doors were miraculously opened by the angel. The stairs in Acts 21 verse 40, on which Paul stood and addressed the Jews after being arrested, was the staircase that led up from the Temple Mount into the fortress. Some believe that Jesus was tried by Pontius Pilate in the Antonia fortress before being taken away to be crucified. The journey to Golgotha, called the Way of the Cross, is indicated by the red lines here. In John 19 verse 13, we read that Pilate brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement. On the screen is an early Roman pavement uncovered during excavation where the fortress originally stood. Naturally, it's believed that this paved area was the courtyard where Jesus stood and where he was judged by Pontius Pilate and mocked by the Roman soldiers. The pavement is now located under a convent beneath the present street level. Here's a close-up of a section of it. Some shallow carvings, blurred by time, are in some of the pavement stones. It's believed that bored Roman soldiers standing on guard duty made these markings for their dice games. This is interesting if it was the same place where the soldiers cast lots to decide who would have the garments of Jesus. Talking about Pontius Pilate, this inscription referring to him was found at Caesarea in some ruins near the sea. Up until the inscription was found, no other writings referred to him except the Bible. And this caused some to question the truth and the reliability of the biblical record. But archaeology once again vindicated it. Pilate, being the Roman procurator of Judea, had the authority to pass the death sentence on Jesus, but it was the religious leaders of the Jews who planned it, and Caiaphas, the high priest, was the prime instigator. Recently, during excavation of some tombs in Jerusalem, this burial box, known as an ossuary, was found, which has a connection with Caiaphas. On the narrow, undecorated end of the ossuary is an inscription which you see here, and which says, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. See it there, the inscription? Inside the ossuary were the bones of 6 people, 2 infants, a child between the ages of 2 and 5, a youth aged 13 to 18, an adult female, and a man about 60 years old. The excavators believed that they had found the final resting place of Caiaphas' family and wondered if the bones of the 60-year-old man might in fact be his. If not his, then at least a son of his. Here's another ossuary that was discovered, which has a connection with Caiaphas. This ossuary bears an inscription, which is the name of a relative of Caiaphas, the Jewish high priest. It was a common practice for Jews in New Testament times, especially in Jerusalem, the Jerusalem area, to bury their dead for about a year in stone niches like these in caves. After the flesh decomposed, the bones were gathered into limestone boxes known as ossuaries and placed in sealed burial caves. The boxes were from 50 centimetres to 1 metre long and about 35 centimetres or 30 centimetres wide. Many such, as you see here, have been found, often decorated and sometimes bearing inscriptions as already seen. A dramatic discovery involving one of these boxes took place in Israel in 2002, which could be the earliest archaeological evidence of the existence of Jesus Christ. It's seen in the next picture on display at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, Canada. There was an inscription on the box, and it's printed in French on the wall. In English it reads, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. As you can see in this close-up picture, the inscription is on one side of the box. It's written in clear Aramaic letters, which are highlighted at the top. Unfortunately, the box got cracked during transit to the Royal Ontario Museum, and the crack ran through the inscription, as you see here. As you can imagine, it caused quite a stir, as is indicated in this headline in a Toronto newspaper, which reads, "Oh my God, 2,000-year-old relic linked to Jesus cracked on way to Rome." That's the Royal Ontario Museum. This picture reveals how badly the box was cracked, but the experts repaired it and the inscription. Regarding the inscription, normally inscriptions on ossuaries only mention the name of the deceased and the father. It's unusual to mention a brother, but this one does. When we take into account that Jesus had a brother named James, whose father was Joseph, it's quite probable that this is the ossuary of that very same James who is referred to in the New Testament as the leader of the church at Jerusalem. After all, how many men in Jerusalem at the time by the name of James would have had both a father named Joseph and a brother named Jesus? And how many brothers by the name of Jesus would be mentioned on an ossuary unless they were well known or famous? Students are divided on the authenticity of the Jesus ossuary. Tests have been made by the experts. Many believe it's a genuine and authentic inscription. Others don't want to believe it. While we're on the subject of inscriptions, this one here, engraved in Greek on limestone, was found in Jerusalem during excavation. Originally, it belonged to the Temple Mount. It says, quote, "No foreigner may pass the barrier and enclosure surrounding the temple. Anyone caught doing so will be himself to blame for his resulting death." End of quote. And here's another inscription in Greek that was found asking for donations to help build Herod's temple. Josephus points out that Gentiles were not allowed into the inner courts of the temple, and there were partition walls with inscriptions on, forbidding entry on pain of death. In this picture, the stone partition wall is indicated by the letter D. The court of the Gentiles is E, this area. And of course the temple proper, or the sanctuary, is here. I don't intend saying anything about the sanctuary because the mosque stands there today and no archaeological excavation can be done on the site. But when the time comes for it to be removed, the archaeologists will have a fields day, I'm sure, and will no doubt look for evidence of the foundations of the Jewish temple. The third temple, built by Herod at Jerusalem, was unquestionably a mammoth undertaking. It was the largest ever built at Jerusalem, but had the shortest lifespan. The whole complex was not finished till 62-64 AD and was destroyed 6 to 8 years later by the Romans in AD 70. The Roman armies came up under General Titus in AD 70 and they besieged the city. They breached its walls, they got inside, and just as Jesus predicted, as we read in Luke 21 verse 20, "And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, will then know that its destruction is near. Jesus also predicted that because the people refused and rejected him, the Holy Son of God, their holy temple would also be destroyed. And so, even though General Titus issued strict instructions to his soldiers to preserve the sanctuary, it caught fire in the heat and fury of the battle, and it was destroyed in spite of man's attempt to save it. Ever since the temple was destroyed, over 1900 years ago, the Jews have hoped and prayed for another one to be built on the Holy Mount, on Mount Moriah. Some have wondered if the temple will be built next to the mosque. Others are adamant it definitely will not share the same site. A silent testimony to the hope of rebuilding was found in the western wall of Herod's temple beneath Robinson's arch. Carved into one of the wall stones under this arch in the 4th century AD was a Hebrew inscription. It was found in 1969, and the words are similar to Isaiah 66 verse 14 and are used to express the mood of optimism that the temple would soon be rebuilt. It reads, "And when you see this, that is the temple rebuilt, your heart shall rejoice," etc. In view of the Muslim mosques being on the Temple Mount, some may feel it's unlikely or impossible for a Jewish temple to be built there. But that's what people used to say about the prospect of the Jews returning to their land and becoming a nation and repossessing Jerusalem. But, contrary to the expectations of many, these events have taken place. And from a human point of view, they were more difficult to achieve than building a temple. For some time now, there have been stirrings among the Orthodox or the religious Jews in relation to rebuilding a temple on the site of the mosque. Their organisation is called the Temple Institute, and they won't rest till a Jewish temple is rebuilt. They have a temple museum in Jerusalem near the Temple Mount, in which is placed a model of the temple they hope to build, as you see here. The Temple Institute has, for some time, been in the process of making all the ritual objects, furniture, and priestly garments required in the temple service. For example, this golden menorah, or 7-branch lampstand, it weighs 100 kilograms, about 200 pounds, and its estimated value is $3 million. They've even have the cornerstone for the temple ready to lay, and it's been rumoured that all the other stones have also been prepared and stored. They've had religious processions to the Temple Mount, taking with them this 4-ton cornerstone, causing a lot of uproar among the Muslims. The winds of change are blowing. It's not a question of if a temple is rebuilt, it's just a matter of when. It's only a question of time, God's time, and it will be rebuilt. This is taught in a number of end-time prophecies in the Bible, and it will constitute one of the last signs of the second coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. So take a good look at the mosque, because its days are numbered. Doomsday is coming, and it will be replaced with a Jewish temple, inaugurating the final countdown to Armageddon and the second coming of our Lord Jesus Christ.